I mean, I will say that like the more that any one person can just be curious about the other person, if you end up, you're finding that you're kind of like not moving forward. I think the key really is to sort of unpack your assumptions. And sometimes you have so many and they're so like clear in your head, you wouldn't even assume they're assumptions, but it could be like, well, why isn't this important to you? Or what am I saying that seems unclear? Like I'm thinking about the guy in the pitch meeting, you know, my sense is that was probably someone who was so in the weeds that they couldn't just say a simple thing like, if you do this thing will happen. Or if you do this thing won't happen. Or when this thing doesn't happen, we save this much money. I mean, that's what like investors or people who are generalists need to hear, right? They just need to hear like the cause effect and like the 30,000 or 100,000 foot view.
Welcome to the H-Files, the new series of the Hands-On Business podcast, where we dive deep into the world of healthcare leadership and the unique challenges facing small to medium-sized healthcare businesses. I'm Hakeem Adebiyi, and after years of helping businesses grow in various industries, I'm excited to focus on the area that I know the best, healthcare, one of the most dynamic and impactful sectors in the world today. In this series, we're going to explore what it takes to lead and grow in healthcare, from navigating the complexities of regulation and innovation to overcoming the everyday hurdles of building a sustainable business in this fast-paced environment. Each episode will feature real-world insights, expert interviews, and actionable strategies that can help you push your healthcare business forward. So whether you're a leader in the space or an entrepreneur ready to break into it, the H-Files is here to give you the edge. Now, back when I was much younger, I worked with a group of brilliant scientists on a healthcare innovation project. Now, one of the smartest people in the room, Harvard graduate, razor sharp, nearly derailed the entire pitch meeting, not because of the science, but because they couldn't explain clearly the value of their idea or get buy-in from the non-scientists at the table. And that moment really stuck with me for quite some time. And it's why today's guest is so important, because Francie Jain is the CEO and founder of Terawatt, and she's made it her mission to help brilliant minds, such as those in the STEM disciplines and medicine, step into leadership, communicate effectively, and build influence. So in this episode, we're going to be unpacking why technical excellence often isn't enough, and the 5 ways that soft skills and management training can really start to help STEM professionals thrive in leadership roles. So I'm really looking forward to this one, and thanks for coming on, and welcome, Francie.
Thank you so much for having me, Hakeem. I'm delighted to be here.
Excellent. So I want to kick off. Obviously, you work with some of the smartest people in the world. You work with doctors, scientists, engineers. Can you take us back to a moment when someone who was exceptionally talented hit a wall, not because of their ability, technical ability, but because something softer, communication, leadership, influence was missing? What happened, and how did you help them through it?
Yeah, actually, that's a good question. Well, we had a really nice in-person sort of, I guess you could call it training, coaching session with a hospital in the Boston area a little while ago. And one of the things they did at the beginning of the session was they did a personal assessment. And it's basically just sort of answering some questions about how you sort of see the world. And then it kind of gives you information about what, how you see the world, right? How you see the world, how as it relates to other people. So it kind of gives you a picture of yourself in the context of others. And I think it helped people fall into like one of 6 categories. And what was cool about it is that they learned within their category, like what's important information for them to act, make them act quickly, and how is that different from how other people act. And so these are like surgeons and PhDs and different people, like researchers in the hospital. I think the big takeaway from all of them, they were shocked and like laughing and kind of looked relieved, because they started to realize that the information they're telling people to act quickly is not compelling other people to act as quickly as they would act quickly. And so it was really helping them, like those kind of soft skills, and helping them understand how they see the world and how it's different from other people's, gave them the ability to be more flexible in how to describe it to other people. Or even some people, what they wanted to do was like almost walk around with their category, with their group, like on their prox proximity card so that people could know how to pitch them. And it wasn't even pitching me, it's a hospital, right? It's more like saying like, hey, this needs to happen immediately. For some people, if the consequences mentioned, that's a reason to act. For other people, it's like data. They're all different things that people need to hear that make them want to act. And like that was hugely like groundbreaking for them. And they had never had, so one of the things is they never had a personal assessment. And I do think that that's the problem a little bit with being human, is because you're always in your own skin, never exactly know how you are in relation to other people, or you don't know what makes you great sometimes. I always feel like those questions for different applications are kind of like, what makes you great? Why would you be great for this program? And sometimes you just don't know like how you're different from others. And that's really like one really important part of like social emotional skills and just, communicating, is understanding that people see the world differently than you. And that can be a positive and a negative, but you just need to figure out a way to connect.
Thank you. And do you think, in your experience, that actually working with STEM, that interpersonal connection, that being in your own skin, is that unique to them, or is it just that they are a certain type of people, so there's more in that space where they're very technically gifted, but they don't actually focus on that interpersonal area?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I sort of call it like the engineering brain. Like, I think if you're taught science and math, there's like a very clear process of like accepted progression. And I think that therefore you assume everything else has a very clear accepted progression, how it needs to go. And really, humans aren't that way necessarily. They're not like hyper logical, right? There's a lot of illogical stuff and there's a lot of emotion involved. And I think sometimes those people need to be a little bit deprogrammed just to understand like communication is not the same as like, surgery, right? There's not a hierarchy of how you do it and how it goes. It's more about like the gray areas and connecting and finding the common ground or being flexible. And that can be really hard when you really are very clear about what you do and you do it very well. And you think, well, why do I need to be flexible? I'm like, I'm clear, I'm right about this. But guess what? So is the other person. They're quite clear, they're right about it too. And that's when the rubber hits the road, because people aren't able to be flexible because they're so quite clear that they're right. And I think that the soft skills really help people kind of step back and realize that there's not like a right or a wrong. It's just how people are just different. They just think differently.
Okay. And it's interesting because I've spoken to a few people who balk at the term soft skills because they say they're not soft at all. They're very hard to master. So what's your view on that specific topic before we get into some of the soft skills, which we will still use the term soft skills, but I'm just wondering about your view on that.
Yeah. I mean, I will say that like the more that any one person can just be curious about the other person, if you end up, you're finding that you're kind of like not moving forward. I think the key really is to sort of unpack your assumptions. And sometimes you have so many and they're so like clear in your head, you wouldn't even assume they're assumptions, but it could be like, well, why isn't this important to you? Or what am I saying that seems unclear? Like I'm thinking about the guy in the pitch meeting. My sense is that was probably someone who was so in the weeds that they couldn't just say a simple thing like, if you do this thing will happen. Or if you do this thing won't happen. Or when this thing doesn't happen, we save this much money. I mean, that's what like investors or people who are generalists need to hear, right? They just need to hear like the cause effect and like the 30,000 or 100,000 foot view. Or it could even be just like that person just keeps repeating, because for them that's the obvious order of operations of what the science is. And so for them, they're kind of like not understanding it. And it could also be the other person, by the way, instead of them just being like, I don't get it, they could say, well, if this doesn't happen, then what happens? Or how big is this market? Or they could also help them instead of just sort of sitting there and being like, well, this person's not getting it, right? Everyone has the ability to change their style, in the moment. I mean, we all have brains, right? So the question kind of is like, can you be sort of curious and creative and flexible to find that common path?
No, I think, yeah, and that's an important point, because communication is a two-way street. It's not that we should be looking at people who are technical and saying, oh, well, they're not explaining themselves clearly, so there's obviously some issue with them. Actually, it's about, as you just said, the other person trying to understand and well, number one, understand that people are different and communicate in different styles, and therefore that they have a part to play in bringing out the relevant information and helping that person on the other side of the table. And I know that it's very hard to generalize, but I'm going to ask you to generalize. In a, when you look at people from those sort of disciplines, is there any specific soft skill where you'd say, actually, whenever I've been in that environment, this is kind of one of the key things that they have a problem with in terms of soft skills or communication or whatever that may be?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I do think when people get really caught in that, like, I've repeated the same thing 5 times, I understand why you don't understand it. I think that is a little bit of just a lack of sophistication about the gray areas in like human communication, in my opinion. I just think that like it's just out of science and math, there just isn't that much black and white in the world. It's much more kind of like nuanced style, finesse. I mean, there's a lot more give and take, creativity, innovation, right? I mean, so I just think holding on tight to processes doesn't do anyone any favors when you're trying to communicate with another human.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I'm going to come on to that in a minute. But just for the listeners and the viewers, so what's the reason? Because obviously you were in asset marketing before, which would on the surface seem very different to what you're doing now. So what inspired you to kind of focus on this niche?
Yeah, well, okay, good question. The thing, I mean, truly for me, like a pivotal moment in my career. So I went to business school in my late 20s, and it was a very sort of quant business school, very like mathy. And they gave us a Myers-Briggs assessment, personality assessment. And it was really helpful to me. Not everyone loves Myers-Briggs now. It's been around a long time, and some people say it's not scientifically sound, but it really was helpful to me. So there are basically 4 sort of criteria, and you kind of are on a scale, like on a pendulum, like a spectrum within each of these 4. And there's one that's called introvert and extrovert. And I was like off the scale extrovert. And I was shocked because I didn't think of myself as an extrovert until that moment. For me, and then I sort of was thinking a lot about like why did the results show that? And I think it is, and so my takeaway is that I'm really motivated by relationships. And it's not that I'm an extrovert walking into rooms, like saying hi to everyone and making best friends with strangers. It's that relationships are like number one for me, like more than numbers, for instance. And so then here I am at this like very mathy school, learning finance and accounting and economics. And one of my epiphanies was, great, so cool. That makes me unusual, right? That relationships in this group, that I'm dominated, or my brain is so like focused on relationships. And so what I decided to do is do my post business school career in marketing alternative assets. And so it was basically like being a matchmaker. And so what I was able to do was really understand the strategies, the context, like, how it relates to what's happening in the news or what the math is, and explain that to a more of a generalist audience who had capital to allocate. So if you think about like this job is basically like trying to think what it was another example of saying it, but basically there's a person sitting there who can allocate their money anywhere. They have so many options, and so I'm this intermediate where I'm saying you should allocate to us. We're exactly what you're looking for. Let me explain how we work, or we might be good for you because this is how we work, and based on like your needs and like our strategy. And so the better that you can like relate to those people, form relationships, really explain what the strategies are and the processes, the more likely you are to be able to raise capital. And it was like private equity funds and hedge funds. And so I always thought of myself as a matchmaker. And when I started to get interested in like this idea of helping people like be better, but affordably, I realized that once I was able to make it a marketplace and B2B, then that was really right in my wheelhouse, again, of being a matchmaker. So I sort of sit in between coaches and employers and help them kind of make a match and help them find the exact right person. It's a little bit different because before I was representing one fund, whereas here I'm truly like a matchmaker, like, having people on the left and people on the right and finding the right match. But it's actually quite similar in terms of like process. but the business is wildly different. And so that's kind of the connection, the relationship.
Okay, yeah, that makes perfect sense. And we'll talk a bit about that before you go, because I think it's a really interesting concept, and I think a very valuable one. So I would definitely want to get into that. So, and because you're talking about communication there, effectively the basis of what you've done previously and also now is around that communication piece and making sure that things are clear to both sides, and actually breaking down some of those barriers with your own communication skills. So from a why do you think that is such a gap? You know, the soft skills from an educational point of view, you know, because I mean, I come from a STEM background. I did sciences all my life, and then I moved into sales, marketing, etc. But you are very much just taught all the technical stuff and you're not really taught anything about, well, going out into the world, you're going to be communicating with people. So it's almost like, well, if you're good at it, you're good at it. If you're not, you're probably just going to be stuck in a lab for the rest of your life. Why do you think that these sorts of soft skills are not taught in the educational system?
Yeah, well, the first thing I'll say is I think one of the problems we all have, and I have for sure growing up, is we're pretty much always evaluated on our individual knowledge. I mean, most every test is test based on my knowledge. There's very few group components because it always gets so hairy. Like if you're like a group of 4 people, I hated this in business school. There'd be like these group assignments and like one person would do all the work. The 2 people would have no idea what was happening. And maybe a 4th person would do some like the write-up or something, right? And it was always just like so disjointed and you weren't really actually communicating to make sure everyone was in the same boat. It was more just like how fast could you go? And so I think that like there's not great education around group learning, at least in my experience. And the vast majority, you know, of everything that I learned was individually based, right? I mean, all the tests, everything was based around me. Like, was I raising my hand in class? You know, how are my test scores? All that stuff? It's all individual. And so I think we just spend so much time on like what I think, that it takes really a long time to reorient yourself towards like, well, how do I communicate that to somebody else? That's a really different view. And I'll say actually it comes out a lot. And if you're, you know, having done sales and marketing, you might be struggling with this because I struggle with this all the time. Like I always want to say to people like what Terawatt does. But actually the more thoughtful way to market is how does Terawatt help you? Why should you care? And like that is such a hard transition to make when your whole educational life has been, let me tell you what I think. Let me, you know, here's how my brain works. And no one really cares because like, they're like, I want to know about my brain. Everyone's just walking around being like, I only care about me. And so at some point you need to make that jump to like, okay, well, let me tell you why this matters to you. And then that person, you know, then they soften up a little bit and will be willing to like go back and forth. But I think the education system is a huge part of it.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a problem actually, and I think that it prevents. I mean, well, as you said, it's very individualistic, and actually, we're in quite an individualistic society. So as you talk about there probably isn't as much room, even in business. You know, when you're talking about who gets to the top, it's generally the people who are talking about themselves a lot and talking about all the great things that they do. So if you're not one of those people, then it's difficult. And a lot of people who come through the STEM route often think, well, I don't want to show off. So I'm just gonna work hard and show that I'm really good and I'll get to where I need to get to. And often that doesn't happen. So can you, in your experience, you know, things like emotional intelligence, you know, executive presence and those sorts of things and some of the soft skills that people talk about, I find that STEM people specifically are often very skeptical around these terms and, oh, it's all corporate language and it doesn't really affect me. I'm just going to get on my job. How do you start to bridge that gap in mindset in terms of the things that you know that are beneficial and will help them compared to what they think are beneficial and will help them?
Yeah. Well, you know, there's a ton of research and even, you know, and everyone in like the STEM area will appreciate, you know, what works for Google, right? So In 2015, there was the Google Project Aristotle, and they published results saying that they had been looking for years to find the common thread between its most successful teams. They didn't really define what successful teams meant, but like my definition is, innovative, came up with like new products that were profitable, that move the company forward. There's like IP. There's probably like 5 or 6 things, right, that could define, successful teams. But they said the only through line and within the entire company, I don't know how many people work there, but I'm assuming like, over 10,000. The only through line was psychological safety. And that these were teams where people felt comfortable providing an alternative point of view, or providing skepticism, or offering suggestions, or, whatever the thing is. They were basically, these were groups that were not caught. It was the opposite of groupthink. They were not caught in groupthink. They're helping people get out of groupthink by expressing how it could go wrong, or whatever the thing could be. And even since then, it's been 10 years since then, and we still haven't figured out how to bring psychological safety to organizations at scale. I mean, everyone knows that study. It's very well known, and I think about it all the time. And then, the one of these actually even a great case study we have is an example in that as well within a hospital organization. What happens when psychological safety comes to a large organization? And it reduces employee turnover. It, increases awards. It reduces medical errors. All these things start to happen. And I think that on an individual level, everyone identifies with that too, right? Because you never want to be the person who has to catch your tongue. If everyone's saying, oh, we should do this, and you were like, that's a bad idea, you want to say that, right? And you want to have a better product. And so I'm sure anyone in the sciences will agree that if you have an idea and you think it's a bad idea, you want to be able to say it and not feel like you're going to lose your job or be penalized in some way, or ostracized, whatever the negative consequence could be. So I think everyone can identify to that, relate to that. And I think there's just, for anyone, again, in the STEM area, there's just so much data about the psychological safety and how it impacts organizations. It's every organization too. It's not like just this or just that, it's just humans, and I think, and the thing to really think about is it's just really saving people from groupthink. And then the alternative, the opposite case study is New Coke. Do you remember that? Where the executives at Coke, there was a secret taste test done and a blind taste test. And it turned out that blindly people preferred Pepsi over Coke. So all these are new products. I'm not sure who came up with this idea, the marketing people or the new product people, but someone came up with this great, brand new idea. Change the ingredient list of Coke, the recipe, to be more like Pepsi. And then everyone will just be so happy because that's what they prefer anyway. And it turns out that everyone on that team had the same kind of way of thinking. And so they didn't have any feelers on the team, which I'm a slight feeler. So they didn't have anyone to say, yeah, but if I want to go to the grocery store and get a Coke, I want to know, I'm getting the Coke in the red bottle. I don't want to get the new Coke. I don't care if 9 out of 10 people preferred Pepsi to Coke. I just want the Coke that I'm going to get. I want to have the taste that I expect it to be. And it torpedoed. It was a huge crisis for Coca-Cola when they did that. They did this big rollout and they didn't really poll customers or anything. And so I guess my point is that's sort of the opposite of psychological safety, right? They could have been saved many times if someone came along and was like, have we thought about how this could not work? But there was no downside or antithetical thinking to sort of knock them out of the group thing. And that's kind of what.
And it's interesting. Isn't it? So why do you think it is that when the studies are so clear that psychological safety is important for businesses to thrive and get the right ideas? The term I often use is being agnostic about where the ideas come from. You just want the best ideas.
Right, 100%.
So why is it that still seems to be in lots of businesses, not something that's pushed to the fore or developed or worked on?
That's a great question. So my first thought is, I'm not even sure if I want to say this, but I do think that sometimes people get caught in this politics game at work. And personally, I always felt the politics side of jobs was the hardest for me to deal with. Because like you said, I just want to be the person who does my job and the results show for themselves. But it doesn't always work that way. And you do have to find a way to communicate with other people. I think ultimately the reason it hasn't caught on is because it's a little bit of change and people prefer to work the way they've been working and they just don't want to change it. Like, especially if you've gotten successful in the old way, it's not fun to switch to the new way because who does the new way benefit? The young people or, whoever. I mean, we hear about this a fair amount, which is like this intergenerational conflict in organizations. Like the Gen Z group of people really see the world quite differently than baby boomers. I'm Gen X. I'm kind of like in the middle. Like I think the Gen Z people have like great ideas but I see both sides, and I think that once people are sort of in power, they don't want to change. I mean, that's sort of my sense, but I don't really know.
I think you're probably right, actually. I think people, if they've done things in a certain specific way, it's got them to a position where they're comfortable with. So why would you then change it for anyone else, I suppose? So on that note, let's talk about some of the impact that you've seen to try and change some people's minds. So have you got an example where improving soft skills or working on soft skills with a STEM individual has transformed their career or team dynamics or performance?
Yeah. So this is this incredible case study I love to talk about. So one of our coaches, he's a PhD in psychology, and his father actually came up with a system of understanding people's strengths and weaknesses, and they call it opposite strengths. And the idea is you might have some strengths, you might have some weaknesses, but there are other people who have the opposite. They have your weaknesses are their strengths, and your strengths are their weaknesses, and how like people who are super different from you can end up really helping you come up with good ideas, which is actually just another definition of psychological safety, right? 'Cause it's like understanding the opposite perspective. And so his IP, his intellectual property and content and training materials were used at a large healthcare organization in Colorado. And it was like 4,500 employees. They had a 24% employee turnover rate, which was higher than average. So hospitals on average have about a 20% turnover rate, which is relatively high to begin with. But when you're above the average, right, and you have worse turnover, it's going to start to get harder for you to recruit more people. And the cost will be higher as well, because in a hospital, you're either paying overtime or traveling nurses to fill these gaps. It's not like you can just have an open spot and just, everyone just deals with it the way they might in like, a tech company. And so they brought in this content and they made it optional, and it was like a group setting, and everyone was sort of talking about it. They would practice it. There was content they would read, and but no one was made to do it, just up to you. And every year after they started, the turnover choosing to leave reduced 1 or 2% a year for the whole organization. And then after 9 years, they got their employee turnover rate to be 4%, which is basically like zero turnover, because it's like as soon as you have an opening, it gets filled because probably somebody is mentioning to a friend or a relative, like, this is a great place to work, you should come. Or people retiring. It's just, you're not really having the same recruitment efforts. So that's incredible, right? So huge drop, 24 to 4%. Then they started winning awards, both as like a great place to work, but also like innovative hospitals. And then what was the coolest to me is that they quantified the difference between what is 24% employee turnover and 4% employee turnover. And it was $32 million a year. And so here's the thing about it. These issues that organizations have real dollar ramifications. And so when you now you have $32 million in the bank at the end of the year, you have a lot more options about how you run your business. Do you want to build a new building? Do you want to buy machinery? Do you want to give raises? Do you want to give bonuses? I mean, you have so many options about how to run your business and how can you kind of keep that going. And then someone will say, well, what's the ROI? Well, guess what? I can guarantee you that group coaching is nowhere near even $1 million a year for these organizations. You know what I mean? So the ROI is huge. It just has to be, though, consistent, right? And you have to live it. And I think part of also what was happening there is that the CEO was engaged as the most junior person. So it wasn't like, I'm the best, I'm the CEO, I know everything. Yeah. You guys need to go learn this and then everything will be better. But it's also like, we're all learning together. Like, everyone can be better. And I think probably I assume that there's like a lot of vulnerability and kind of like ability to learn and change and grow among the whole organization that made this work.
Yeah, I mean, it's about leadership, isn't it? I think that leaders lead from the front, not that they sort of like just point fingers and say, off you go, because then people just start thinking, well, you're paying lip service to it, you don't really believe in it. But when you're there and you're involved, then people engage. And I think that if there was ever a better case today, I can't think one that you're talking about group coaching, you're talking about those soft skills, and you then over a 9-year period saving $32 million a year. And anyone who doesn't think soft skills are important should at least, based on that example, at least give it a try for a couple of years before they dismiss it out of hand.
I think the other really important part of that case study is the opt-in. And like I spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I think the humans want to choose. This is like comes over and over and over again in my life. And the first time I really thought about it is when I was working, in hedge funds, and I was really busy and I was traveling a lot. I had this nanny, and we hired her because she was like an expert in twins. Okay, well, I didn't have twins. I just had one kid. So I was like, well, I know that if she's an expert in twins, she can definitely handle one, maniac child. And I remember saying to her one time, like, well, how do you like even cross the street with twins? It just seems like it'd be chaos, and she goes, oh, here's the thing. You just have to give them a choice. They can either hold the stroller or they can hold my hand. Those are their choices when crossing the street. And so that sort of started me thinking a little bit about it. But it really is true. Like in all of life, you get much better results when you give people a choice. Even if it's a choice of only two things, it's just that people want to decide for themselves. They just don't want to do it because you think it's good for them. They want to do it on their own.
No, yes, certainly. And if you were to tie down a few key reasons why STEM professionals specifically need soft skills, what would you say they were?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Actually, you know what I think it is? So one of the reasons we're really focused on hospitals is for a variety of reasons. So one is that they have a high employee turnover rate. So it kind of depends, I think, on what the turnover rate might be at your organization, because in my mind, if you're over 6% employee turnover, there's something that you can do that can be made better, right? I mean, that's room for change. In hospitals, these are highly educated people who have real brains, and they've been working really hard at their craft, their skill, their specialty, but they've gotten zero management training. So if you're in an area where there's no management training, there's no soft skills training, and your professional development is only in the process of your specific area, that leaves a lot of room for growth. Think about the opposite, right? Look at Kraft or one of these, Procter and Gamble, where they probably have I'm going to make this up, but they probably have 20 hours a year in management training and soft skills training. That's just part of working there. Everyone gets a ton of management training. And so, and think about it for doctors. Yes, it's really important if you're a heart surgeon to know, all the veins and the arteries and all the things. But outside of the operating room, you're still dealing with humans. And who's helping you, communicate better with those humans? There's just not anything happening. And I think it's just when there's just too much focus in an organization on the process, right? Or the expertise, as opposed to just understanding humans. I think understanding humans is just something we all need to do better. And I'm not, again, truly, I'm not great at this. I just find it really interesting, as a student. And I think that, I'm always trying to get better every day. But I do think that it's okay, so here's what's interesting. So my daughter now, she's now 12. She has social and emotional learning as a mini section in her school. We were never taught that growing up. That's valuable stuff where you're or even in preschool, I remember they told the kids, don't hit a kid. You don't like what they're doing. Tell them I need space. And I thought that was genius. It's these kinds of tools you just need to equip people with, and they're all age appropriate. But I guess just my point is we all, even though we're all humans and it seems so obvious, don't we know how to communicate? It's just, there's so many nuances to humans. And like I said, the gray areas where you just have to figure out how to make it work and how to, find ways to connect to others.
No, I think you're right. And I think it is difficult if you're almost... You're going from being a child and being taught in one particular way, individual tests, etc., and then you come out of school and then you go into the working environment and then you oh no, you now need to be, working together as a group, working well, being collaborative, and that's not really been your experience up until that point. And actually, and you're right, and especially when you're looking at hospitals. I mean, obviously, you remember ER, and you look at doctors like Benton, and obviously he had no interpersonal skills, and that was almost seen as, oh, isn't it great because he's so focused on his craft, he hasn't got time to be nice to people, as if that's something to be lauded. And it's great, he's a horrible person, but he's a great surgeon. Thinking, well, yeah, that's, your life isn't just about surgery, is it? Your life is about connection with people. And I think you're right, it is very often much more prevalent in STEM professionals, because it is all about, well, I'm an expert, so I just need to focus on my expertise. All this other bit is, why do I need to worry about that?
It's funny, interesting too, because one of the things that goes on in hospitals, right, is like there's some like academic hospitals where you get paid no matter what you do, like, right, you don't get paid based on like how many surgeries you do or anything. But in any other area where how you connect people changes how busy you are, it matters, right? Because if you're the one heart surgeon who really connects with people and really is able to make them feel safe, more people will want to go to that heart surgeon, because they'll, and like that's a form of marketing. It's something you can do, and maybe that means you get more experience, so you can kind of become more innovative. You're seeing more interesting stuff because you're really able to make people understand what you know, as opposed to kind of like, it's my way or the highway, which I think from my experience, it really, that kind of, way of being turns people off. And maybe you are the expert, but they have to get over a lot of different like feelings in their body to be willing to go with that person, because they're like, well, they don't make me feel safe, but like, I guess they're the best person, and that's a different buy than saying, I love this person, they really understand exactly what I'm talking about, and they're able to really tell me what they will be doing to my heart. I mean, that's like a different experience.
No, and if there was 2 or 3 or a couple of practical things that people listening to this, they're in the STEM arena, what are a couple of things you could say that you could actually start doing today to start building your management, your leadership, your interpersonal skill toolkit?
Yeah, that's a great question. I just, I haven't read all of them, but I just think there's so many really interesting books out there that like really can change your view of the world. Like one that I always recommend is, it just like blew my mind. And I think it's just a great example of like innovation in a hierarchical structure. And it's called Turn This Ship Around. And it basically is the story of a U.S. naval nuclear submarine captain who sort of changed the method of communicating on the submarine. Because when he got there, basically it was that they had like the lowest morale. No one wanted to go on the sub. Like they had terrible test scores. And anything anyone did on the whole ship, they had to run it by this captain. They're like, sir, can I use this bolt for this thing over here? And he was finally like, I just can't. No one can function like this. It's an absurd bottleneck. And so here you are, the U.S. military, which in my mind always is the most hierarchical place you could ever be, very top down. And he's kind of he switched the whole thing. And he was like, I want everyone to be an expert. And if you're going to come up to me and ask for approval for stuff, you need to tell me everything that got you to this point and why why you recommend this bolt over this bolt. And so basically it would be like, they changed it from what can I do this to be the question to him to, sir, I propose we do X, Y, and Z because A, B, C. And then he would say, okay, good, go forward. Or he would like ask 3 questions, and that might change the question or the answer. And like it changed everything on the boat. They then had the best scores of the whole fleet, and they had like the best promotion rates, and everyone to get on the boat, and it like totally changed the whole thing. And here you are in the U.S. military where you think, how are you going to be able to be innovative? It's like, that's impossible. And it ended up being the way to become better and more innovative, because what started happening was the way these subs are evaluated is they have these tests. So like they'll having war games effectively. So like they'll just one day like pretend like there's a nuclear disaster or whatever, there's some war going on. And so everyone has to do their job perfectly. And so all the junior people or all the people who had responsibility for different areas would not only come up with like ways to do their job better, but ways to protect that they did the job better, and ways to like then even did the protection better. So it was like all these different checks so that even if they had like a gut reaction to doing it wrong, they were able to stop themselves and do it the right way. And so that led to a ton of innovation. And that's why they're able to get these great scores, because they weren't saying, oh, well, you told me to do that. It was, oh, yeah, I got that wrong last time. So how am I going to make sure that I don't get it wrong this time? And they just kept building and building and building upon that. So they just had this culture of excellence, because it was up to them. It wasn't, no one was going to save them, and no one was going to be responsible except for them.
So that sounds strangely like psychological safety again, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
It's not, I don't think it's rocket science, actually. I think people want to feel valued, and then they want to feel empowered. And you only feel those two things if you do have psychological safety.
Yeah.
So it seems quite clear that, I mean, we sort of started there, didn't we, when we were talking about psychological safety, and the example you've given again is a very powerful one, but indicating the same sort of thing. So just to, because we come into not the top of the year, but we come into the end of the program. So just tell us a bit more about Terawatt, what you do, and how you feel that what you do has that impact on psychological safety.
Yeah. We're like a true marketplace. And so the best way, like the really like quickie way, is we're kind of like Airbnb for executive coaching. And so we have three stakeholders. We have coaches who we vet, they're experts. Then we have employers who pay for the training on behalf of their employees. And that's the third group. And so we set it up so that everyone is set up to succeed. And we align all the groups, and everyone's and so we get paid just like Airbnb does. It's a take rate, a percentage of the match. And so we're always just looking for any organization that, wants to bring psychological safety, or even has any other problem, right? Because sometimes people will say, we're really worried about burnout, or we're really worried about, we want to set up a mentorship program. We had that recently. And then we send it out to our community of coaches, and we say, here's the RFP, the request for proposal from an employer. If this is appealing to you, please send in a proposal. And so when we did that for the mentorship program, we got 21 proposals. There was a maximum rate, maximum cost that the employer had in mind. So everyone kind of, proposed to that rate. And what was interesting is some people would have like 10 meetings, some people would have 2, and that gave you a sense of like their cost of time. And so the employer could decide, which made more sense for them. Like, do they want to have someone who has a lot more time to give to them, or would they rather have the super duper expert who's done this 1,000 times, who just doesn't have that much time to devote? So, they could come up with their idea. And again, like, I just try to have it opt-in every way possible so that people feel like it's a good use of their time. And I'm sure some people saw the RFP come through and they're like, that's just too low for my rate. Okay, fine, wait for the next one. And so really that's the whole idea. And then also we have this other arm where we help people quantify the return on investment, if that's helpful, because that's the other thing that's missing. Like the thing that's kind of crazy when you think about it is HR and learning and development is like the last frontier of ROI. Like these areas like don't really, what I mean, like have an ROI for their investments. And actually what's crazy is human capital has like one of the highest ROIs there is. And so you could put human capital investment up against like R&D and like, I don't know, anything else, buying real estate, right? Because the idea is like, it's a huge return on capital. And especially because everyone hasn't, like they used to relegate this to such like the back part of the office. They didn't invest in it. And so it's this very underinvested area. Anyway, so that's what we do. And, we have coaches everywhere. And right now we got about 100 coaches. And my philosophy is this could easily be global, because I think there's a lot of opportunity to have almost like time zone arbitrage, where you're like doing stuff over Zoom and like maybe you're 20 hours away, but the time works for everyone. You're able to make it more affordable to the people on the other side of the world and give your expertise to them.
I think it sounds like it's an invaluable service, because we've just been talking about all of the benefits of actually having a coach and actually having coaching. And actually, more important than that is actually the companies investing in their people and realizing, because if I was working for a company and they didn't invest in their people, that would automatically be a red flag to me. And I know that there's still that, oh, no, well, we just work hard, we play hard. Yeah, that's great. But actually, you're going to be in a career for quite some time. You want development, you want progression, you want to be able to know that your company is investing in you. And as you said, it's not just about, well, I'm spending X amount per employee. There's a massive return on investment. So even if you were just completely and utterly cynical as an employer, it would make sense to use something, a system like Terawatt, a platform like Terawatt, to make sure that you're actually getting that development and that support that's really going to make a difference. And some of the numbers you've given are quite significant, I think. So, all right. So we've come to the end, and it always goes around very quickly. I've noticed whenever I'm doing an episode. So if you were to distill your advice into a mantra or into a couple of key points for technical professionals who want to lead or develop or be developed, what would it be?
For the individuals or for the organizations?
Both, actually. Give me one for each.
Yeah. So I think that my one thing, I think if you're an organization, you're trying to figure out how to get smarter in this space, I say start surveying your employees about things that matter. Like, hey, we're interested in retention. These are 5 ideas we're thinking about. What do you guys think about those? And have it be open-ended. Ask it 5 different ways. Have people rank order, have people vote, have people write paragraphs. You just want to hear what people have to say, and you see what the trends are. And it just gets you closer to understanding how people think, because it's hard, right? If you're sitting in some boardroom, I think that someone who's 22 should do X, Y, Z. You have no idea what they want, And the more that you can start to just get closer to what people care about or what's important to them, I think the better you can build a high engagement organization. And I think for individuals, there's so much cool stuff out there. And I think it's just read a few books and just practice it a little bit. People talk a lot about how's coaching relate to AI, and for sure you could say, you could sit down with Claude or Chat GPT and be hey, listen, I had this exchange. What am I missing? And just reflect on it a little bit and substitute for practice, written real time. But you can learn about, what the universe knows about talking to people or communicating with people through these AI bots, and just have that be where you ask your dumb questions and stuff like that. But again, there's so many great books that are, again, on this subject, and it costs $8, or it could be free if you join borrow from the library. Yeah. So I would just say, just be curious and just start to read a little bit, because it might set you down a path of really being more curious to get deeper into this stuff.
No, thank you, Francie Jain. I can't get that $32 million out of my head, to be honest.
Right, incredible.
I'm going to be quoting that to everybody for the next few weeks when I'm talking about soft skills. So no, thank you very much for coming on. I know that my listeners and viewers will have found it very, very useful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a great day.
So you might have worked out by now that I love guests who give me stats that I can then quote, which really back up the episode. And Francie was firing out stats all over the place. So she gave the example of the hospital in Colorado that had a 25% turnover rate when they started working with group coaching and looking at those so-called soft skills. And within 9 years, they were down to 4% turnover, and they were saving £32 million a year. So if you don't believe in those soft skills, if you don't believe in coaching, then I'm hoping that alone will change your mind. And don't forget to pick up the show notes over at thesalesaccelerationformula.com/podcast-show-note. You'll also find an option to subscribe to our mailing list so that you can get notes for every single episode straight to your inbox. While you're at it, don't forget to tune in to next week's episode of my new 5 in 5 series, where I share 5 actionable takeaways in just 5 minutes from this episode, which will help you supercharge your business growth. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this podcast with your friends, colleagues, and anyone else who might find it valuable. Most importantly, keep the feedback coming so we can keep improving and bringing you more of what you love. Thank you very much for tuning in. And remember, keep listening, keep growing, and keep thriving.